bulk up, effectively lift some intellectual weight, and be ready, because something else is coming down the pike this way. There will be another catastrophe and another response to this catastrophe, which will be the catastrophe itself.
This is Kaiser Johnson with Liberty and Finance, and this is the Miles Franklin Weekly Special for December 13th through December 20th, 2022, while supplies last. This week we feature two sovereign coins, the 2022 Silver Krugerrand and the 2023 Silver Britannia with Queen Elizabeth, both at $4.75 over spot, the lowest premium we've seen on sovereign coins in almost 2 months. Made by the Rand Refinery and the South African Mint, the Krugerrand is one of the most recognized coins today. These silver Krugerrands are 3/9 fine and feature a springbok antelope on one side and the portrait of Paul Kruger on the other. The 2023 Britannia from the Royal Mint in London still feature the portrait of Queen Elizabeth II, even though the Royal Mint has already started minting some coins with King Charles. This makes this first run of 2023 Britannia likely to be the last Queen Elizabeth Britannia issued. Both the Silver Krugerrand and the Silver Britannia come 25 to a tube and 500 to a box, and both are IRA eligible. And if you'd like to learn more about a precious metals IRA, call us, and we'll be happy to help you in that process. Our number for all orders is 1-888-81-LIBERTY. That's 1-888-815-4237. We're available after hours and on weekends, and we look forward to speaking with you.
Welcome back to Liberty and Finance. We're honored to have this distinguished returning guest. Author Michael Rectenwald is the author most recently of a book that just is coming out this month, The Great Reset and the Struggle for Liberty, Unraveling the Global Agenda. He's also the author of the book Google Archipelago, talking about how we are all prisoners in a digital world of our keepers' design that's trying to keep us trapped inside a world where we only get to see what they want us to see, and we only get to say what they want us to say, and eventually we only get to do what they want us to do. But he's rejecting all of that and showing us a way out. Michael Rectenwald, thank you for joining us again on Liberty and Finance.
Great to be here, Donegan. Thanks for having me.
I should mention that we're recording this on Tuesday, December 13th, 2022. Wanted to talk with you right now about something that's very current in the news these days, and that is Elon Musk's, the billionaire owner of Tesla, purchasing Twitter for $44 billion and making some big shakeups there, firing a bunch of executives, restoring a bunch of canceled and deplatformed people's accounts, and now starting a series of releases of what are called the Twitter papers, documenting and proving government collusion with Twitter, among other social media giants, on suppressing and censoring speech. And a lot of what you've talked about in your books, Google Archipelago, and talking about this digital prison, we'd like to get your take on the impact and the import of these current events, and the big picture being, is this going to be a key turning point? Does this have the potential making of being kind of a jailbreak for us from this digital prison that we were put in by all these social media giants in collusion?
That's a great question. So yeah, I've argued that in Google Archipelago, which I think came out in 2019, so that's almost 4 years ago, that in fact this what I call big digital, which includes, not only Google, but also all of the major social media sites, and the basic structure of the internet itself is produces what I call like a governmental and economic power for supervision, surveillance, tracking, recording, censorship, facial recognition, robot swarming, monitoring, corralling, social scoring, trammeling, punishing, ostracizing, and unpersoning, otherwise controlling populations. So what the Twitter files have revealed is that, in fact, I was right, that the big digital has served as a corporate state apparatus in not only censorship, but really complete control of information, and the kind of a corporate state appendage is what Twitter was. But also in this case, and in almost all cases, an organ of the Democratic Party and leftist authoritarianism in general. So these files show us that, in fact, that's the case. We see there is, information being leaked. I think too slowly, but I think that's a media stunt on Musk's part. But what we're seeing is that the FBI, and we know from other sources that the Department of Homeland Security, these organizations have been policing expression and basically censoring and downranking and what we call shadow banning and other means of controlling populations and their information intake to incredible extents, such as they're basically they have created a kind of a party line, and that anything that deviates from this party line is basically punished or removed or banished. So, that's been clearly demonstrated, and there's more to come, I think, that will verify this.
So there's several themes there that we need to get into. One is, could you talk to us about the reality of the extent to which our ability to know, to learn, to find out about what actually is happening, has been influenced, not just influenced, but controlled and limited by this big tech powers?
Yeah, I mean, look at Google. Google is not an information source or search engine strictly at all. It is a complete information and knowledge and reality shaping and controlling the institution, and it is basically disappearing from our view all kinds of facts about reality that we can't get through them, and they are shaping reality. They have, with their capacity to disappear information and to basically control what gets found through their engine, and there's really no escape in the sense that many other search engines that have been developed are still based on Google algorithms. So don't tell me to use Bing or something like that. It doesn't obviate this problem. So yeah, I mean, we really have a constructed reality here, a social constructed reality, just like the postmodernists told us would be the case, that reality is socially constructed. It's socially constructed by these leftist authoritarians who are basically completely controlling our access to reality. Also, I want to point to the extent to which these social media and other technologies of what I call big digital, artificial intelligence agents, the Internet of Things and the Internet of Bodies, they're not only monopolies or potential monopolies, but they vastly augment and increase the precision and power of the state to undertake these kinds of this kind of control and this kind of surveillance of individuals and information.
And that's something so I'd like to talk to you about is how the reality of this breaking out or leaking out or showing itself has the potential to upend this whole chessboard. In the past, as long as you can keep all the leaks plugged, and you can keep every possible way of any light seeking into this dark room from happening, you can keep this charade, this game going. But when light does leak in, or there's a breakout of truth that people are able to see, how does that affect the ability of the state to re-clamp down and regain this control over people's minds? One aspect of that I'd like you to address, if you would, is this idea of fact-checking and how so-called conspiracy theories and conspiracy theorists, as they were labeled by others, by the big tech, etc., have often been proven more accurate than the so-called fact-checkers over the past 2 to 3 years in some very important ways that could have affected the life and death of perhaps hundreds of millions of people. Can you talk to us about that phenomenon that people refer to as conspiracy theory? Where did that even come from? And how has the track record of so-called conspiracy theorists versus fact-checkers played out over the past couple of years?
Oh, that's a great question. So what happened was it really started this whole idea of conspiracy theory as an illegitimate way of understanding events. Really starts with Karl Popper in his book, The Open Society and Its Enemies, which I think was published in 1944. And then basically he suggested that conspiracies were just illegitimate understandings, and that they were the conspiracy theory of society, as he called it, was false. That there couldn't be these kinds of massive conspiracies because there's too many agents in the world. There's too many ways things could go wrong. So conspiracy theory of society was an illegitimate approach to social reality. And then the CIA, with the assassination of John F. Kennedy, picked up this idea of conspiracy theory and began to use that notion to basically discredit all kinds of hypotheses about the assassination of John F. Kennedy. And then that's how this epithet, conspiracy theory, got into circulation, and how it's been used to deflect criticism from basically anything that regimes do. And in our case, it's anything that the regime is doing with reference to all manner of things. But in particular, in recent times, in particular the COVID crisis and the vaccine regime that followed on its heels, all of this stuff has been poo-pooed as conspiracy theory in order to delegitimate any kinds of inquiry into origins and into impact and effects of the virus and the vaccine. So much so that we've seen doctors losing their licenses for questioning the efficacy and safety of vaccines. We've seen this whole takedown of individuals over this this control over this as any assertions to the contrary of what the official narrative was. So it's been this phrase conspiracy theory has done a lot of work. It's done a lot of work for the regime.
And as far as the track record, can you talk to us about that over the past several years, when reality has played out and facts have leaked out and people have started to see what actually plays, what the fruit that actually comes from some of these things? How has that affected the ability to maintain that narrative, that sort of that closed loop world, this artificial world of a party line from which you cannot deviate? How has that been affected by the actual events that have played out and the few cases where there have been sort of leaks of that out to the public?
Yeah, I mean, you can look at any number of narratives that were floated and that have been debunked. Interestingly enough, starting with whether you're a Trump supporter or not, there's no question about the fact that the regime floated a conspiracy theory regarding Trump with reference to Russia and this Russia collusion narrative, which they, basically deemed to be the official narrative, and any deviation from it was deemed a conspiracy theory, ironically. So That was one. And of course, the Hunter Biden laptop, which is the opening salvo in the Twitter files, we find out happens to be true. And then we find out that, of course, the origin of the COVID virus in a lab is most likely true, and that it is now deemed probable that that's the case, that it came out of a lab funded by NIH. So let's not throw this all on the Chinese. We're talking about the U.S. government and various agencies of the U.S. government funding the research that led to this virus. And that's horrific. And then, of course, the vaccine narrative. So they've had a very tight control over this, and have produced a certain contingent of the population who basically serve as state agents to reinforce the narrative and to discredit anybody that challenges it all along the way. It's almost as if they're produced, and we know that some of them are effectively bots. But in the case of individuals that are actually living, breathing humans behind some of these Twitter handles and other sources of discrediting, that there are people that are actually believing the narrative, and they enforce it on the others by destroying them and attempting to discredit them and to throw that epithet of conspiracy theory and conspiracy theorists at them. But there are plenty of leaks, and many people have been onto this for quite a while. And the Twitter shakeup represents a challenge to the corporate woke hegemony, the almost complete and total control over major news and social media containment. So this is a significant this represents a significant breach in the cabal's ability to contain data, and I think this is in information and so forth. So that's why I think when Musk went to move to buy Twitter, you saw all this uproar and hysteria, and you're continuing to see it with people leaving Twitter and announcing that they won't be on a platform that serves up misinformation and disinformation. Elton John being a rather conspicuous but pathetic example thereof. You're seeing the regime go into overdrive, really, to try to stem the bleeding that this represents.
It reminds me, and people will probably have these same visual memories that I do. First of all, the scene from the Wizard of Oz, where they find Dorothy and then her companions finally make it into the Emerald Castle, Emerald Palace, and there they see this huge spectacle with flames and holograms and all this stuff and loud booming voices, and then they see this little phone booth over to the side where there's this curtain that the dog Toto pulls back the curtain, and there's this pathetic man back there who says, "Pay no attention to that small man behind the curtain." So he's telling them, don't pay any attention to what your eyes are telling you and what you see right in front of you, that this is all a big fake. The other one was back at near the end of the Iraqi war, where you had who was I believe almost like a press secretary for Saddam Hussein, Baghdad Bob, on the roof of the palace as the American troops are actually can be seen in the background entering the city. He said, "There are no Americans here. We have everything under control. Everything's fine." So you talk about this almost complete containment of information by the tech giants, and yet so it's like this huge dam holding back the water of truth, and then there's this major breach in the dam now with Twitter being lost from that fold. In your judgment, will it be enough to basically nullify the control and the containment of the rest of big tech? And I have two aspects of this. One is from the media technology control standpoint. The other is maybe about the way humans think or are we as a population have such a short memory span or whatever that we'll be distracted by and easily just let it back into being put back to sleep by this digital version of reality that can be reasserted on us? Or do you think this is the turning point? This is the breaking of the dam?
Well, it definitely represents a significant leak, and it could eventuate further breaches in the containment structure. And the thing is, though, we can expect Google and Facebook and YouTube and Instagram and other apparatuses to up the ante, to increase their censorship and control functions, so that they try to, let's look at it as kind of like a war, and there's different battlegrounds here. So they're going to up the ante and to increase the force and power of those other institutional apparatuses, so that the Twitter breach is effectively just one particular opening, and that, if you can't find news through Google or other search engines, then there's nothing you can post on Twitter that counters the mainstream narratives. So this is one of the things that you're going to see a lot more of, unless there becomes further breaches. Like, let's say Musk would buy Facebook. I don't think he could quite afford that, but if he did, then the dam would be utterly broken.
Can we turn back to the moment in time when perhaps a lot of Americans would have been scratching their heads and going, wait a minute, who's pulling the strings? And that was when the seated president of the United States, Donald Trump at the time, was deplatformed off of Twitter. And can you talk to us about the dynamics surrounding that and what the phenomenon that was in the history of the world, or the history of the United States at least?
Yeah, I mean, we had this tremendous intervention on the part of the FBI and Democratic politicos like Michelle Obama and others, effectively calling for this deplatforming and the total silencing of the world's most powerful leader in terms of political power and military power. So it's an unprecedented event. And it just speaks to the incredible apparatus, configuration of apparatuses here, and how they have this power. And that, in fact, as I pointed out in Google Archipelago, that it's a leftist totalitarianism that's driving this. Left-oriented elite who are controlling this, and that have a vested interest in this kind of control, this kind of narrativization, and vested interest in a particular version of reality and events. And that speaks, I think, to my next book, really, the Great Reset and the Struggle for Liberty: Unraveling the Global Agenda, because I think that Trump, for whatever his faults and mistakes, which I think the Operation Warp Speed was probably the most monumental, Trump represented a particular aggravation for these global elitists, and this is why they have attacked him to such an extent. They don't want this agenda of nationalism at all. They are globalists intent on effectively dissolving national sovereignty, and they want to institute effectively, although not formally, a kind of global governmental control. And, these social media sites are a significant representation of ideological and technological control, and for pushing through this narrative and suppressing any opposition and resistance to it.
Could you talk for a little bit about the human aspect of this in the psychology of ordinary people as individuals and as an entire group and as a population? We heard terminology such as mass formation psychosis and other things brought out about people being able to be herded mentally herded into compliance with unthinkable restrictions, basically just abdicating all kinds of freedoms, abdicating constitutional protections of rights and liberties, abdicating their careers, abdicating their businesses, abdicating their freedom of speech, abdicating their ability to travel, etc. in the past couple of years, through a very effective campaign of constant wall-to-wall 7x24 barraging of fear messages and that sort of thing, where sometimes it was remarkable how you'd hear the exact same wording on all the different major media channels at the same time. And you certainly had suppression, as you've mentioned, of professionals who broke ranks with that, who said, that's not what's going on. Here's other alternatives. It doesn't have to be this way. But can you talk to us about, in the current regime, even if there's leaks, even if there are leaks coming out from the Twitter papers, etc., but if there's 90% of the remaining edifice of the big tech dam remains in place, can you talk to us about the human aspect of how resilient versus how savvy people are as individuals, but how gullible we are as a crowd? Can you talk to us about how effective you think the psychology of humans, and especially group psychology, will affect the ability of us to pull ourselves out of this trance that we've been put under and get back to being able to speak about the truth and know the truth?
Well, that's a great question. I mean, in his book, which was reissued this past year, or a year before, I think maybe, Andrew Lobaczewski wrote a book called Political Ponerology, or the Science of Evil. And in that book, he talked about basically you can expect a certain percentage of the population to succumb to totalitarian ideology. And that there'll be a contingent, though, roughly 30%, 30 to 40%, who will resist this. And this is what we're seeing effectively going on. You have the true believers representing about 40 to 50%. You have the dissidents representing about 30 to 40%. And then you have the elites that are effectively promulgating all this. A good percentage fall under this mass formation psychosis. And but it's not the entirety of the population. I can't speak to the psychological means by which this is done. Desmond has written about that. That's not my expertise, but on a sociological level, there is a good deal of evidence that the 30-40% of holdouts or dissidents will remain, but the fact is that they will suffer at the hands of this regime. They will suffer the loss of their rights and so forth, and they need to simply maintain and hold on. They need to hold on because, I mean, your audience is certainly not part of the 50% that I'm talking about. There is a contingent that doesn't succumb to totalitarian ideology, and this contingent has a significant role to play in history. It has the responsibility of both maintaining its integrity as against the reversive blockades or lies, the inversions of the truth that are promulgated by the regime, and they have the important role of effectively breaking down the regime's intelligence operations, really.
We've been talking about the impact of Elon Musk buying Twitter and how that has effectively caused a break in the wall of this information containment. But there's equal amount of criticism being leveled against Musk for various reasons. Some people say, "Oh, he's rich, therefore he's an elite," or whatever. But some people are also saying that he's part of the swamp in the sense that he's in deep with Neuralink or other abilities to interface humans to the grid, etc. Can you address that future that he's been working on for some time, and help us understand, is he really a friend of humanity, of liberty?
That's a great question. I mean, I think, you're going to have the detractors that'll say this Twitter breach is not represent anything significant because Musk is, he also owns Neuralink, which he suggested recently is ready to be installed into human beings and would connect them to the cloud such that you'd have almost complete and total control over people. They wouldn't even have a will at this point. Their thoughts, as I wrote in my book, Thought Criminal, would effectively be controlled by this collective mind. But I think we have to take one thing at a time. We first have to have the availability of people who are resisting the narratives in the first place, so that they can then survive to the point where they subsist to the point where we can then resist these other incursions that maybe Musk is involved in. And Neuralink is certainly one of those prospects. But I think basically we have to take the victories that we get, the battles that we can win at this time, and then prepare for the future battles, but not to sort of surrender what we're getting or be totally cynical about the possibilities that this opens up, such that we miss the opportunity to push back.
That's a good point. People have been frustrated with Donald Trump, for example. He seemed to present himself as the champion of the people, the champion of the individual sovereign country in the face of globalism, etc. And then they attached themselves to the man as his personality and all that. And then we came, Operation Warp Speed and some other things that made people think, wait a minute, maybe he's just controlled opposition. Maybe he's just, kind of like the opiate of the people, leading us off to non-effective resistance against actually interfering with the swamp. We're not draining the swamp. We're just buying it some time. And here again with Elon Musk, he's going to be the savior of the people. He's going to be the guy who, comes down from Mount Sinai with the tablets and tells us what the truth is. So maybe part of the danger is in attaching ourselves to any one individual, any one personality, any one charismatic leader, rather than to the principle of freedom. Can you address that for us?
Yeah, absolutely. We have to put the principle of liberty before all things. And if we have the right principles, then we'll know how to respond with each particular eventuality that we'll see coming down the line. And this means that if we want to, Musk has a particular vendetta, I think, against the woke regime. And we should take that as it comes and exploit it to the fullest, but not to the point where we become followers of Elon Musk. Elon Musk is not our leader. He is merely somebody that's intervening in a particular area that we need help on. That doesn't mean everything Elon Musk says goes, or that we should blindly become sheep who look after Elon Musk and become his basic herd, another herd mentality. We need to resist the herd mentality altogether. But we should take the gains that we could possibly make here and use them to further effect.
We've interviewed educator and author Alex Newman several times on our channel. He's a contributor at Epoch Times, among others, and the New American Sentinel and so on. And we, one of the principles that emerges there, he talks about the importance of making sure that you raise your children to be independent thinkers and to not just go with the herd. And one way to do that is through homeschooling, for example. He has an organization called publicschoolexit.org. It reminded me of an incident that happened when I was in high school, and there we were in a classroom filled with, this is like an exceptional class. It was one that only the brightest kids were able to take, that sort of thing. And we're trying to watch a movie, but the projector broke down. And two students in that room full of students plus a teacher, two students leapt up from their chairs, ran to the projector, and started fixing it at the time. And the teacher made the point afterwards that he said, "Did you notice that the two students who leapt up and ran and solved the problem in the projector were those who just transferred in here to this public school from what was called the open school at the time, where there had been a lot of unschooling, people following their own interests, developing their own talents, following their passion, that kind of thing. They had transferred to the public school, but all the public school students just sat there like dutiful sheep in their seats with the projector broke down. What are we going to do? I don't know. We have to wait for somebody who's qualified to touch it. We can't touch it." And Alex Newman talks to us about the importance of teaching your children to think for themselves, and the importance of being able to think logically, think rationally, not just go for the sound bites, not just go for the lines that are being spun for us. Can you talk to us briefly about the importance of that independent thinking and how to foster it in ourselves and in our children?
Yeah, I think, first of all, just to reference the public school system here, it is the factory for producing statist subjects. It is the means by which the state produces its own minions, its own supporters. So I think exiting from that is almost essential, if not entirely essential, for the prospect of maintaining and increasing liberty in the population. So I would say, from my standpoint, is that I encourage people to look at. I taught this way at NYU. I effectively said, "Listen, let's look at this particular issue from multiple perspectives and ferret through the various possible ways of thinking about it, whatever their ideological propensity was, and then breaking it down and not to espouse any particular ideology." But I think the principle has to be independence and liberty and autonomy and basically intellectual integrity, such that we are not, we don't fall for just anything. We have a critical apparatus to now analyze various ways of approaching any kind of topic.
We've heard from several sources that the ability to reason, the ability to think rationally, the ability to argue and follow argumentation effectively and call people when they're basically using manipulative tricks to circumvent proper thinking are difficult enough to maintain when you're in an environment that is no longer supportive of that actually actively punishes that. But it becomes even more difficult in an environment where fear is injected, fear or greed, but especially fear. And that certainly happened over the last 2 years. We've been told, when you mentioned, circling back about 15 minutes ago, you mentioned that with the Twitter breach of the wall in the big tech edifice, there is a circling of the wagons happening, a redoubling of efforts by the other participants in big tech to make sure that they maintain tighter control, that sort of thing, of the narrative going forward, so that Twitter won't undermine the entire edifice. But we've also heard that there are gameplay scenarios being, or in organized manner, being played out about like worse pandemics, much more virulent and affecting children and young people and that sort of thing. So is that another factor that we need to be mentally and psychologically prepared for? Is that one of the doubling downs, part of the circling of the wagons will be, so the last fusillade didn't completely destroy your will to be independent. Well, we'll just increase the pain, the threat, the fear, and then enough people will become compliant because of the fear.
Yeah, absolutely. As I point out in The Great Reset, The Struggle for Liberty, they ran many simulations in advance of COVID-19, and two of them right on the heels of it, Clade X and Event 201. And we see simulations are now being run again for a more virulent virus. And so we have to see that here we tread into conspiratorial thinking but it might be necessary to entertain these kinds of thoughts, because if in fact another pandemic is being planned, they will do certain things in advance of this. And these are simulations. They'll run tabletop exercises, and they'll do this. And I'm not saying they're producing the virus, but they certainly are producing the responses to the virus through these simulations. That's exactly what they did with Event 201. Every eventuality of the COVID response was anticipated by that particular simulation. So look at those simulations and see what, in fact, they're preparing for us. Not necessarily the virus itself, but at least the response to the virus or whatever other contagion gets somehow released or leaks from particular labs that are producing these contagions as we speak.
Right. So how do we, like in your book that you've just come out with this month, you talk about a plan for pushing back against this desire to exert total control over our lives. How do we do that in an environment where fear is being engendered in the masses around us? It seems to be the most difficult situation to overcome, is where your friends, your neighbors, your companions are all being just indoctrinated with fear.
Well, I think we need to read, we need to study, we need to be diligent, we have to basically inoculate ourselves against this. And then we can be beacons for these other people. They are going to call us every name in the book, and that could be increased. All these epithets will be thrown at the resistance. We're the real resistance here, or the dissidents, all the dissidents who do not buy in. So bulk up effectively, lift some intellectual weight, and be ready, because something else is coming down the pike this way. There will be another catastrophe and another response to this catastrophe, which will be the catastrophe itself.
Right, the crisis response model. Now, you don't have to go farther than presidential press conferences. White House press conferences are a petri dish showing exactly what you're describing, and that is, there were recently some objections being raised by a journalist, one of the rare journalists in the room to actually ask hard questions, to the point that the press secretary walked off the podium and said, I'm not going to deal with this. We've dealt with this before, because you're asking questions that are dangerous. and it occurred to me, my wife and I were talking about that this morning, and it occurred to me that the accurate retort would be, yes, dangerous to you who are maintaining the swamp, the house of cards of lies. Yes, the truth is dangerous to the swamp. Are there sound bites of truth that we need to arm ourselves with, as well as that armament of good thinking, clear thinking?
Well, I think we need to arm ourselves against the sound bites, the reversive blockades that they throw up, the inversions of reality that they promote. And I don't like to think in sound bites myself, and I think it's more important to be prepared for to be prepared for their sound bites, and to basically repel them, because that's really what we need to be able to do. We need to be able to repel their way of trying to wrap reality in this complete lie. This they wrap reality in this lie. It's kind of like a limited hangout type situation where they might wrap some truth around the core of lies, and we have to be able to penetrate that wrapping. There's so many ways they do this. This is all textbook CIA developed techniques, and we need to be prepared for all those kinds of techniques. But I don't advocate, or I don't have a set of sound bites to repel it. I do have a list of 9 elements to resist it in the book.
And where can people get a hold of your latest book?
Well, right now it's available on my website for pre-order, and I'll be sending out signed copies probably late this month. That's michaelrectenwald.com. And also, it's now available for pre-order on Amazon. It's The Great Reset and the Struggle for Liberty, Unraveling the Global Agenda.
Did you have any trouble getting it? Like you mentioned, it's on Amazon. Are there any platforms that declined to carry it, or that you've run into trouble before like that?
No, not yet, but they never carry my books in bookstores. Any physical copies have never been displayed anywhere. So you can't get it in a bookstore. And it's, basically verboten, it's all my books are effective, other than the ones I wrote before when I was an academic. All of my books are basically they're on a banned list in effect. So in China, actually, Google Archipelago was literally banned. So yeah, but you can find a way to get them in. The last resort, or maybe your first resort, if you want to avoid big digital altogether, is go straight to my website.
Well, we've been speaking with Dr. Michael Rectenwald. He's the author of several books about freedom and truth. He's an advocate for freedom. And in a future interview, we'd love to talk about your path to where you are today, because that's not where you started out. And I think it'll be very educational for a lot of us to understand that, because there may be elements of that we can draw strength from for ourselves, for family members, loved ones, helping understand where people are at and how we can learn a new way of thinking and behaving. So thank you for being a beacon of truth, and may you be kept safe along the way, because as you mentioned, the powers that be are likely to try to pound a bump on anybody's head who stands up as a leader in the space of helping people seek freedom, and we try to be part of that as well. So very grateful on behalf of all of our viewers for your presence here on Liberty and Finance.
Thanks so much, and Merry Christmas to everybody.
Miles Franklin Precious Metals is one of America's oldest and most trusted bullion dealers. Miles